Hi, okay. So let's get started. I'll start by talking a little bit about kind of what I'm going to be teaching next semester. And so that'll obviously give you a little bit of understanding of why I chose to do this LES. So next semester I'm going to be teaching at BCS, and I'll be teaching grade 8 social studies, grade 9 and 10 Canadian history, and grade 11 contemporary world. I chose to do this LES on grade 8 geography, so one half of the social studies class. And the first unit that I'm going to be there for is Aboriginal territories. So, um, what I've pulled up here is a poster that we had to do for 410 with Dr. Burres, and I think it's a good graphic representation of kind of my thought process. So I'm going to work through this a little bit at the start before getting into the LES that I designed and submitted for this class. So uh, I'll talk a little bit about the process. So we learned a lot about backwards design, and I really believe in that. So I kind of use backward design to plan this um, unit or this LES. And what that entails is starting, well, exactly what it sounds like, starting from the end and working backwards. So basically, you start by setting forth the learning intentions or a guiding question. And for me, I did a bit of both. As you can see highlighted in red here in the center, this, that highlights everything, but there we go, just like this. So what does territory mean to us as settlers? And what does territory mean to Aboriginal groups around the world? So they're going to be making a comparison here and hopefully understanding the importance of territory to Aboriginal cultures and way of life and groups as a whole. Um, so by asking this question and exploring it, these are the learning intentions that I'm hoping students will take away. The first being for students to view the importance of territory, particularly how it fits into a complex relationship with culture and way of life, and how threats can affect this relationship for various Aboriginal groups. The second learning intention is for students to indicate various threats to Aboriginal territories, either environmental, social, political, things like that, and consider possible solutions to those threats. And finally, to understand the complexities and idiosyncrasies of various Aboriginal groups and cultures as a means of fighting stereotypes and prejudice. So, the ways I'm going to accomplish this is by talking about this kind of complex relationship between territory in the center here, uh, culture, way of life, and how threats impact them. So, what we're going to be doing is the progression of learning sets forth that teachers must talk about either Inuit people and Nunavut, or Cree territory, or Naskapi territory. And I'm going to focus on all three as a class, and then I'm going to have students with their culminating task. Each pair of students will pick a different Aboriginal group from around the world and apply this to them as well. So kind of the whole basis of this unit is that they understand this relationship. So how does territory play into way of life? How does way of life play into culture? How does culture play into territory? How can a threat to territory affect way of life, therefore affect culture? Or how does a threat to culture affect way of life, affect territory? Um, I want students to understand that it's a delicate balance between culture, way of life, and territory, and that a threat to one of these aspects affects the whole web, the whole balance of them. Uh, so as a class, we're going to be looking at this. I'll refer to it as a relationship from here on out, but how this relationship uh, kind of is visible with the Inuit people in Nunavut, how this relationship is visible with the Cree people, and how it's visible with the Naskapi people. And then again, for the culminating, they'll look at this relationship in terms of different Aboriginal groups around the world. So, yeah, this is kind of the visual representation, but all of this information is represented in these templates, which I will be handing in to you. So we'll kind of start working through these templates, and I'll explain my thinking throughout all of them. As you can see, it's 5 pages, more or less, kind of a lot of empty space and stuff like that. But starting with template 2, Uh, oh, by the way, these are templates that were introduced to us by Dr. Burris, and they are from an author, Cooper. So they're called the Cooper templates or Cooper model. And again, it's backwards design. So you start at the end, you plan your learning intentions. Then you plan your complex task to make sure it's evaluating the learning intentions you set forth. And then you fill in the gaps by providing links to the curriculum, making sure you're covering that. You pick the competencies, the skills you want to evaluate. But yeah, so basically you set forth the learning objectives, big skills and essential ideas. For me, the big skills, they reflect, these three reflect the learning intentions I had set forth here, more or less. So I want students to understand the interconnectedness of culture, territory, and lifestyle. I want them to see the link between development and territory. How does development affect territory? Or in other words, development can often be viewed as threats to territory. And I want them to identify and fight prejudices. And this will happen through studying cultures and becoming more aware of certain traditions and stuff like that. And so the essential skills are contrasting and comparison. Obviously, that comes up a lot throughout this, as you can see. The basis of the whole unit was comparing kind of territory to settler society to what it means to Aboriginal groups around the world. Research and essay writing, those kind of go hand in hand, and there's something that through the culminating task will come up a bunch, and I want students to work on those skills. So this is a quick overview of the culminating right here. So I'll describe to you the culminating task very briefly, and then I'll talk about how I'm going to equip students with the skills and knowledge they need for the culminating task, and then I'll go more into depth about the culminating task. So the culminating task is called the International Conference, and what it has students do is to, in pairs, conduct research about an Aboriginal group around the world that they've chosen. Once they've conducted that research, they're going to write essays individually that ask them to explore the relationship between culture, way of life, and territory, and to the group they've chosen to study, and then give some specific examples of threats and how it might impact that relationship. So once they've written that essay, they are going to pair back up and they are going to create research posters and present those research posters to the class in the style of kind of an international conference. So they'll go in front of their peers and kind of introduce the culture of the group they've chosen, and they'll talk about kind of, the organization of the territory, stuff like that. And then they'll introduce the threats and kind of maybe propose some possible solutions. So yeah, that's basically what they'll be doing for the culminating. And how I'm going to allow them to do that is at the start, when we look at Nunavut and the Cree people and the Skapi people as a class, the students are going to complete Venn diagrams that ask them to compare certain groups. What are the what makes the Nunavut people unique from the Cree people? What makes the Cree people unique from the Nunavut people? And what are kind of some similarities they show, right? Or share, sorry. Throughout all of it, all the enabling tasks, you'll see links to the curriculum. This is from the progression of learning. So if you look at the progression of learning, I'll just scroll up to show you. Well, it says right here. For the progression of learning, geography cycle one of the categories is native territories. So this LES seeks to cover this entire category. As you can see here, it says the study. It says the study of one of 3 native territories suggested in the program is compulsory. Teachers may choose from among the following: Nunavut, Cree territory, or Naskapi territory. I'll actually be covering all 3 as a class by applying this relationship, exploring how this relationship kind of manifests itself in each of these 3 groups. And then I'll have students explore how it manifests itself for different groups around the world. And they'll do that guided, though individually, in their culminating and present their findings to the class. So these are the 4 kind of characteristics or aspects of that must be covered. So location of a native territory, characteristics of a native territory, planning and development of a native territory, and issues affecting a native territory. So all of these four are going to be covered throughout the enablings, and that's made clear in the or in the templates, and you'll be able to look more into that as you read through it. So again, Venn diagram comparing them. Then they'll be doing annotated bibliographies. So in their partners or in their pairs, they are going to, once they've picked their Aboriginal group, they're going to conduct some research to begin to answer questions for their essay and their research poster and so on. They'll find 5 credible and relevant sources, and then they will cite them properly, create a bibliography, and underneath create or write little descriptions of what the source talks about. And I want them also to include at least 3 little tidbits properly referenced from the site to show me how they might incorporate it into their essay. This is a good assignment because, again, it works on the essential skills, essay writing and research, but it's also kind of like it's a lesson and a work period in one. They're learning a lot about how to conduct research while also working on the assignments, on the culminating that they're going to be doing later. So, and finally, they're going to do a concept map to show me that they've really grasped this kind of thought process, this relationship here. They're going to create their own concept maps that kind of display the relationship. And they can do that in relation to a specific group or generally to Aboriginal groups. But I want them to create a concept map showing me they understand the relationship between culture, territory, way of life, and how threats can damage this balance. So those are the 3 enabling tasks that will allow students to grasp the skills and knowledge that they'll need for the culminating. So now I'll just quickly talk about the culminating in more detail. Again, here's the description. We've already gone over this, so I'll just skip through that. And here's what it's targeting, but again, that's from the progression of learning, so we've already covered that. Here's basically what I'll ask them to do. 3 components, right? The essay, which is done individually, and they'll be assessed on a rubric, which they'll be provided. Then the second part is the poster, which they'll be marked in pairs. They'll complete in pairs and be marked in pairs. And the assessment tool will be a rating scale. And the reason I use the rating scale is because it allows students to see what needs to be included, but it doesn't necessarily tell them how to include it. So it gives them a bit more leeway. It promotes creativity for them to do things kind of the way they see fit. But it also kind of gives them clear guidelines of what needs to be included. And the same for the presentation. So there'll be 3 different aspects that'll be marked on: the essay, the poster, and the presentation. I'll quickly go up and I'll show you. So these 4 sections here aren't normally on the Cooper model, but I included them just to kind of make it more relevant to what we've been talking about in class. And I'll quickly go over that and how I feel that this unit kind of relates to these competencies and why I picked them. So as for the social justice competencies, I picked competency 2, knowledge construction, competency 3, prejudice reduction, and competency 4, equity pedagogy. I picked knowledge construction because obviously a huge part of this unit is kind of informing students of cultures they may have been otherwise unaware of. And that can go a long way. I really like the relationship between competency 2 and competency 3 because I feel knowledge construction really plays into prejudice reduction. As students learn about these cultures, they're going to start to unlearn certain prejudices they may have had or stereotypes they may have learned somewhere along the way. And obviously that's extremely important. So yeah, I'm going to have students build up their knowledge of certain cultures in Canada and around the world, and therefore reduce prejudices. And the benefit of learning about cultures around the world is they'll start to learn that even though Aboriginal cultures have some core values, they also have a lot of things that make them unique. Not all Aboriginal cultures are the same, and that in itself is prejudice reduction. So the 4th competency is equity pedagogy, and I feel that, again, the first 2 play hand in hand to kind of work to the 3rd, which is equity pedagogy. By including these views in our classroom, or by learning about this in our classroom, we're becoming more open to their views, and I hope that reflects. As for the subject area competencies, I picked competency 2 and competency 3. Competency 2 is to understand the organization of a territory, and competency 1 is to understand the organization of a territory, and competency 2 interprets a territorial issue. Uh, Obviously, these both really reflect in the final, in the culminating task, because they'll have to obviously understand the organization of a territory and present that to the class, make that clear to the class what the organization is, characteristics of the territory, and so on. And competency 2 interprets territorial issue. They're going to be looking at threats, remember? So students are going to be looking at threats to certain Aboriginal groups, and then they're going to propose solutions and stuff like that. So that's clear how they're going to have to interpret a territorial issue. As for the cross-curricular competencies, as you can see here, I included competency 1, uses information. Competency 5, I believe, it's the one about adopts effective work methods. This is competency 8, which is cooperates with others, and competency 9 has to do with communicates or expresses themselves, right, or their views. Let me make sure I got that right. Competency 9 communicates appropriately. So again, competency 1, competency 5, competency 8, competency 9. A lot of this reflects in the culminating task. They're going to be using information and adopting effective work methods and using information to create their essays and all the aspects of the project. And they're going to need to work well with their partner, obviously, to do so. And then when they're displaying what they've learned to the class, they need to communicate that appropriately. And for the intellectual operations, I picked makes comparisons. Obviously, that's like huge throughout. We have the Venn diagrams comparing what territory means to settlers and Aboriginal groups, establishing facts that they'll need to present to the class. They need to characterize a territory, again, because they need to, it goes really well with understands the organization of a territory and characterize the territory, and identify differences and similarities, again, with the Venn diagram and so on. So I believe that's, I'll show you one last thing. So we looked at template 2, which is the unit curriculum and assessment plan. We looked at template 3, which was the complex assessment or complex task assessment plan. And now we'll look at template 4, which is the unit instruction plan or the lesson sequence. So what lessons am I going to equip my students, or what lessons am I going to present to my students to equip them with the knowledge they'll need to complete the culminating and so on. And so this was really built heavily from the progression of learning, which we looked at again. This is Geography Cycle 1, Native Territory, which is the unit I'm going to be doing. And we looked at how there's 4 aspects they'll need to know, and each aspect has obviously its own little descriptors. But these descriptors I used to create the lessons. So lesson 1 is going to be heavily tied to learning what exactly makes an Aboriginal group, and how do we know if a territory is a native one, so on. Some characteristics, and introduce groups from around the world, kind of. So lesson 2 talks about Nunavut territory, 3 Cree territory, and then lesson 4. So the first 3 are kind of introductory in the sense that they talk about cultures, but not really about the issues affecting cultures or so on. But lesson 4 is kind of where it takes that shift to more deep thinking. So we're going to talk about the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, which again, what is it and how does it relate to Aboriginal territory? Well, it's all about the discussion of land claims, development, how that affects territory. And that's where we really start to see this web being introduced, or the relationship between territory, way of life, and culture, and how threats, which development can often be seen as a threat, affects this balance. So we're going to talk about development up north and how that can affect that delicate balance. Lesson 5, we're going to look at kind of more groups around the world, and we're going to pair off and start to pick those groups. And then they'll be given time to work on their annotated bibliographies. Lesson 6 will all be about territorial loss. What is territorial loss? We'll talk about treaties and more about development. And they'll start their concept maps to show me they understand those relationships, which again was an enabling task. And lesson 7 is all about fighting prejudice. We're going to spend a whole class talking about prejudices and stereotypes, and we're going to kind of talk about some ways we can work to unlearn those. Then the complex task starts, and they'll be given classes to work on them, and we'll go over proper essay writing, how to structure paper, formulate your arguments, and introduce expectations for the poster, what should be included, the evaluation of it, so on. Um, so that's kind of what I've included. That's the Cooper model. That's kind of the outline. I like it because it's simple, but it's detailed. It's not overbearing, I don't find, but it includes all the information you need and sets forth like clear outline for the LES. What I'm submitting to you is just a package that has kind of a very brief introduction, kind of saying exactly what I've said and explaining my thought process, and then the templates. So you'll be able to look through this and read through it as you see fit. This model is for somebody, like this is for Eva, but if you request, I could make this available to you too. That's just about all, I think. So it was a great class, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to learn what we did, and I look forward to implementing this in my class next semester. Thanks. Bye.